Welcome. Oh, I'm seeing lots of familiar names on here. Welcome, everyone, to our January, believe it or not, 2026. Here we are, our monthly Parenting with Pride webinar. I want to invite all of you to our space where we get together and discuss things that are on our mind, things that we have questions about, ways to increase our journeying as parents, as caretakers, as human beings, and trying to come up with some subjects that y'all want to take some time in your evening to join us for. So if this is your first time, welcome. If you are joining us like you do every month, welcome back. What we do is we have our chat open at all times. If there's anything that you hear during the presentation that you have a question for, you also can do raise hand. At the end, we will make a space for question and answers after you hear everything that you learn. But if there's something pressing that you hear right away, please feel free to signal to us again through the chat. We often like if you're comfortable in our chat, putting your name and your pronouns and where you're coming from. It's always so cool to see. Florida is a pretty big state, and we love to see where folks are joining. And we also have folks that join us from other states, which we love because our PFLAG National does put our webinars out for anyone. And some of our stuff is very specific to Florida, but a lot of it's not. And so if y'all want to go in the chat and do that, I am here in the bottom of the state in Miami, and it's getting cold here. So for those of you that are further north, I'm sure that cold front has already hit. Aaron, you're up in Jacksonville, I know, so you're probably already pretty freezing. But we're in for some cold weather, which will be kind of nice, and then it'll go through. Hi, Alicia. Welcome, everyone. I also want to let folks know, especially if it's your first time, we do record our webinars, and I ask our speakers ahead of time and get their permission. And this is way we are able to really keep a collection of a lot of the webinars that we do. We have a YouTube channel. And so after the webinar, it takes like a day or two for us to get it up there, but I do a follow-up email, and anything we talk about, resources that we'll offer to you will be in that email, and also the link. So feel free, if there's something that you heard and you want to hear it again, you can go back and re-listen to it. As well for folks that register and something comes up and they're not able to go. And so we'll wait just a couple more minutes and see if we get some folks to join us. But let me check in the chat and see who we have, where we're coming from. Oh, welcome, Brenda, your first time. Excellent. Really nice to have you here. And now that you've registered for One Parenting with Pride, y'all are going to receive my once a month, that's all you're going to get, newsletter from me. And it'll give you information on some events coming up the next month, and of course our webinar for the following month. So you'll be able to register for those in advance. Let's see, is my chat working? Oh yeah, Aaron, you're getting at some really cold air up in the Northeast Florida. Hi, Elizabeth, and Gainesville, it's probably pretty cold there as well. In Sarasota, hi, Ray. Oh, Ray's been on before. Excellent. You're one of my regulars. We love having you on, Ray. Perfect. And Louisa. Well, I definitely, in Tampa. Yeah, so you're going to start feeling that cold weather way before I will. I'll probably be the last one to get it, but I think by morning we'll all be pretty chilly. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker, my colleague, someone I highly respect. I did get a peek at her presentation, and I'm going to be taking notes because it's going to be incredible. I think one of the reasons why we really obviously wanted to do this, for those of you that are going to be joining us at Pride at the Capitol, we have 2 weeks this year. It is not too late to register. I'm sure we can find the link and put it in the chat. If you're interested, you can also reach out to me for more details. We are doing 2 weeks. In the first week, we are going to be focusing on our parents and families. I'm going to be up there with some caretakers and parents and really a lot of folks. And we are going to be meeting with our lawmakers, attending committee meetings. And a lot of that is, how do we get our story in a way that makes an impact. And we know we usually have just a short period of time. And so this is a great way for us to learn how to share what we want to express to someone like a lawmaker, a legislator, or someone at a school board meeting. Often you have like 3 minutes. Sometimes if it's a real crowded room, even less. Or even like a principal, you want to go and talk about why you need certain rights for your children, or it's always nice. And even like a friend or family member, how do we express it? And I know for me, I always do, well, so when Cooper was 2 and he started wearing a dress, and it's not quite that story. I want it to be impactful. I want to be able to hit all those points that I know really make a difference. And so I, along with you tonight, will be learning how to do that. And so I am so honored that Anita, who is like one of the top people putting on Pride at the Capitol, has taken time tonight to really meet with us. And if y'all have missed any of our other trainings for this, we do have that on our YouTube channel. And so back in October, we had one that was kind of like a legislative 101, just to give you that background. What does it mean when there's a bill and a companion? And, I remember when I was first starting out, I didn't really understand the process. So we do have that on our channel for those that want to go and refresh. And then we will have this one that really will give us a way of expressing ourselves and telling our story. And for those of you that will be with us at Pride at the Capitol, you'll learn exactly what goes on in these meetings and how to take those, sometimes maybe just 15 minutes and really express our what we want from our legislators, our stories, and how it's really impacting us. So with that, Anita, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So, as Jennifer said, my name is Anita Carson. I do work for Equality Florida. I'm the director for field and community organizing. That means anything from smaller community gathering, if we're trying to get people to school board meetings, if we're trying to get people to talk to their city council, all the way up to talking to legislators in Tallahassee, both on the Senate and the House side. I work in elections. I work in a lot of different spaces. But it's all about organizing and moving and motivating people to take part and be more engaged in the civic life of our state. And so I'm really excited to join y'all. I do think that the most powerful tool we have is people and their stories. And so I'm really excited to help people today learn a skill about how to make your story the most powerful it can be to affect change in our state and in your local area as well. I would highly suggest if you have the ability to grab just a scrap piece of paper, it can just be half of an 8x11 and a pen. There is one part of this training that's a little bit interactive. If you don't have it, it doesn't end in anything. You're going to be fine. But I do have a mind mapping process through this training that you might get more out of it if you've got a pen and a piece of paper. So feel free to grab that if you've got it. But we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So I have lived in Florida since 2013. I moved down here from Atlanta. I was an educator as a teacher in Polk County for almost a decade before I left the classroom in 2022 and started working at Equality Florida. I was also a union labor organizer as an education organizer my whole 10 years of being a teacher. And now I work for Equality Florida, trying to help make sure that our state is better for LGBTQ people and families across our state. So, really excited to be here. And yes, it's recorded. So, if you don't have a pen and paper, don't worry about it. That's perfectly fine. You can always refer back to this later if you need to. So, why should advocates tell their stories? As someone who was a science teacher for a long time, I very much rely on data and statistics and analysis to help me make decisions. However, generally speaking, most people are going to be changed or have their mind changed, not by data and statistics, but by something that is pulling at their heartstrings, something that helps them feel differently about it. And I would love to show you the studies that prove that it's true, but that's not going to be the thing that convinces you more than likely. But we do have data showing that people are more likely to change their mind, not based on data and statistics, but based on how they are feeling about a topic. And that's part of why stories are so important. It can elicit greater empathy in the people you're talking to. It can motivate them into an action. Or even if it doesn't motivate them to take action at that point, it can help lower their resistance for later taking an action. And so all three of those things are really huge reasons why I think narrative and storytelling is one of the best tools we have to create positive change here in Florida. So this is where the paper comes in if you have it. We're going to talk about a personal narrative map. The first thing that you've really got to do to be able to create a personal narrative is to take inventory of yourself, of who you are, and the things that might be useful when you're putting together a narrative to speak to either legislators, school board members, your school principal, even that one person in your family that just really is down on whatever it is that you're trying to talk about. So you're going to place yourself in the center of the map, and you're going to map out either personal identity pieces that attach to you. And I'll show you an example of this, so don't feel like you need to do it right now, but things that attach to your personal identity or issues you care about, and then we'll branch out from there. So the picture here is sort of showing that, but we're going to look at personal identities, issues you care about, and then connect to that experiences you had, communities you might belong to, skills or resources that you have to help you in your advocacy spaces, or potential advocacy channels. So we're going to talk through all of those things. I'm going to do this by showing you what my personal narrative map looks like so you get an example of what I'm talking about. So I'm putting myself in the center, just a bubble with my name on it. And then I'm thinking about what are some pieces of my identity that are things that might be impacted by policy right now. So I am an LGBTQ person. We know that LGBTQ people across the state and across the country are under attack in a lot of different ways. I was an educator for more than a decade. Public education is a huge thing that is really needing powerful speakers to speak out and up for it right now. But also, there's some issues that, even though they're not part of my identity, might be places where I would want to advocate. Election fairness is a huge one for me, making sure that people have access to use their votes that are part of how we engage in the civic process. And then immigrant rights are another place for me that I really find value in making sure that people are being treated fairly and justly. So if I'm just looking for myself, where are some spaces that I could land in advocacy? These are my four main spaces. If you have paper with you, that would be something you can take a moment, just put your name in the center and think about either a piece of an identity that you have or an issue that's really important to you that might be a place where you could lean into advocacy. I know for a lot of people on this call, one shared identity that you might have is that you're a caretaker or a parent of an LGBTQ child. That's a huge piece of your identity that might need some advocacy happening around it. Being a parent of children who need our advocacy and need us standing up for them. So I'm going to pause for a minute and give people a little bit of time and also see if there's any questions in the chat while people are maybe writing their space. I see any questions up in the chat. And if I'm looking up to the left, just know I have a second screen that I'm looking up to. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to pause here for a minute. Does anyone have a question about this concept so far? Okay. Now, off of each of these places, whether your identity or an issue that you're concerned about, you're going to start trying to attach to them either personal experiences, communities you belong to, skills you might have. So I would start with looking at my identity as an LGBTQ person. There are certain experiences that if I were talking to a legislator might be valuable for me to talk about. One experience I had was as a legislator in a very conservative county. I consistently felt like I had to hide my life and my family, not talk about my partner. And so that is an experience that I could draw on when I will go to write my narrative later. Other experiences was supporting my LGBTQ students. I've had many, many students that have come out to me over the years because they knew I was a safe person to come out to. I've had plenty of students who were already out at school but wanted help talking to their parents. Being able to talk about those experiences with lawmakers, especially when we were talking about the anti-LGBTQ don't say gay laws that were really trying to limit how much teachers could support students in those spaces. Um, that's a huge piece that I could bring forward when I'm crafting my narrative is my personal experience supporting my LGBTQ students. I also want to look at, are there any community spaces that I'm in that might help me advocate better for the issue that we're talking about? For example, I'm the board member on my local LGBTQ Dems club. If there was a school board policy that was coming up and I needed to try and get people to come with me to a school board meeting, that would be one place I could lean on to try and pull people in. And then another thing is look at your skills. What skills do you have? Maybe you're great at talking to any stranger. Maybe you're a person who is amazing at logistics and making sure that things are planned well. Write down the skills that you have that can help in your advocacy as you're going through this process. For me, I was a teacher for a decade, but I also am a really great writer. It's something that I taught for a long time as well. And so if someone is needing to write a letter to the editor, I'm a great person to call on to do that. So writing down your skills, really taking inventory of your personal story, of the connections you have, of the skills that you bring to the table. That's really the goal of this activity. Do that with each of the green boxes that you have. So I talked through and fleshed out the identity as an LGBTQ person. Then I would move to the next one. As an educator, my experience as a teacher for a decade, the community, I was a union organizer for a decade, so I have a lot of different people that I could call on and talk to about anything that's happening around education. I know that they would be interested in coming and talking about it. An avenue. I know my superintendent really well. I have his cell phone number. If there is something going on and there is something major, that's a person I can reach out to. That's an avenue of advocacy that not everybody has. For you, that might look like you went to school with someone who is now in a position of power, or maybe you're in the same sorority as someone who is your lawmaker. Think about those avenues of connection and how you can utilize those to advocate for whatever it is you're trying to advocate for. So the mind mapping is really about taking a personal inventory of the things that you care about and then how you can connect to them, either through experiences, through communities that you can pull forward, skills that you have, or unique avenues that you might be bringing to the table. As someone who has consistently talked to lawmakers for over a decade, one of the great things that I could connect with, my personal state rep was the husband of a principal that I had worked under. That's a connection that most people don't have. And so being able to say, hey, how's your wife doing? How is your dog? I remembered his kids' names. We knew each other in a capacity that most other people didn't. He was much more willing to, I'm so sorry. My other screen blinked. Um, okay. Um, I want to go backwards. There we go. So anytime you're thinking about what you can do to connect, make sure that you know what your avenues of connection are that might be unique that other people couldn't access that you have. I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have more questions or any questions about the mind mapping exercise and really taking that personal inventory before we move on to the anatomy of your stories? I don't see any questions. I don't see any hands. Okay, cool. So, anatomy of your story. Anytime you're talking about writing a personal narrative, especially when you're talking about either testifying in a committee or speaking directly to a lawmaker, there's four big parts that I try to tell people they need to cover. And if you hit all four, you've had a successful narrative, even if the lawmaker doesn't do what you want them to do. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the first piece is really start with your connection to Florida or to the place you are. So if you are talking to your representative, tell them where you come from. So I live in Polk County. How long have you lived here? What connects you to your community? You're really trying to tell them why they should care about what you say. If you show up and you're talking and you're someone who lives in Alaska, oh, great. I don't need to care about what you say at all. But if you can say, I've been in your community, I've lived here, I have connection here, they're more likely to listen to what you have to say. You'll hear a lot of times people talk about outside rabble rousers or they're bringing outside influence in. This is what sort of inoculates your story to that is by starting with what is your connection to the person you're talking to. If you're trying to talk to the superintendent of your schools, you want to make sure that they understand that you have a child who's gone here, or your children graduated from this place, or you graduated from the county, so that they understand why they should listen to your story. An example, so this might sound like I've lived in Florida since 2013. I moved down from Atlanta and filled a role in the teacher shortage that we had here in Florida, taught in Polk schools for almost a decade before leaving the classroom. I've had the privilege of teaching over 1,000 students, and I've gotten to know and connect with their families and my community. That tells them that not only do I have connections to Polk and Florida, but that I have connections to the community as a whole. All right, Jennifer, am I blinking in and out for y'all?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
Okay,
I see it clearly. I don't know if anyone else does.
okay,
I
just
also want to add to that. I mean, I don't know if anyone else is seeing blinking, but I see it clearly.
I am
As
not seeing any blinking.
okay, there
okay.
you go. Same.
You look great, Anita. You're doing
Thank you.
great.
Um, I think a really good statement for parents to say also here is like, I chose to raise my family in Florida. I think that's a really powerful statement. So they, not only is this, this is a choice. Like we decided that this, maybe you bought your home in a certain neighborhood because the schools were really good, or, your job is there, but this was a conscious decision to raise our children there. So as parents, when we get into that next part, why it's been difficult, we kind of set that stage of not only am I a Floridian, I've lived here all my life or whatever it is, but I've also chosen to raise my children here. So I just think that's a good one to throw in.
Agreed, and definitely a good one to throw in. I like that you said the part about have lived here my whole life. For people who have that connection, that's a great one to point out that you're a lifelong Floridian or a multi-generational Floridian, especially with lawmakers. A lot of them tend to really like to listen to people who've been here for a while. But even the example that I gave, I haven't lived here my whole life. I moved here in 2013, so I've been here for 13 years. Being able to tell them how long you've been here, even if it's a shorter time, you can tell them, I've only been here for a year, but I moved here specifically for, and then whatever that is, make that connection relevant so that they know you are someone they need to be listening to. Because generally they will discard concepts and conversations from people they feel like are outsiders. So make sure that you establish that you're not an outsider, you are a person that they should be listening to. That's always part one. Once you have established your connection to Florida or to that representative, or if you're at a school board meeting, to that school board, then you would move into your personal story. So, sharing a personal experience that illustrates how either a recent law, a policy, or a change has impacted you, your family, or your community. I say all three, you, your family, or your community, because it doesn't have to be something that specifically impacted you as a person. It could be something that impacted your child. It could be something that impacted the students in your county. It could be something that's impacting the homeless population in your county. It could be something that's impacting the environment in your area. It does not have to be something that connects directly to you for you to be able to speak about it. So just make sure that that's very clear. When I say you and your story includes how it impacts the people around you and your community. Start with what happened. So I like to go back to the Don't Say Gay laws, the Don't Say LGBTQ law. The legislator started putting that law forward, um, and it was going to greatly impact how teachers and students and families could speak to each other. How did it affect your daily life? For me, it affected my daily life because it made it harder for me to show up authentically in my classroom with my students, made it harder for me to tell students that they were welcome to talk to me about anything, regardless of judgment. I wouldn't be judging them. I would have to reassess how I might be able to communicate with students. And then what were practical consequences? For me, the practical consequence was I left the classroom, entirely left the classroom. Um, it doesn't have to be backwards facing, it can be forward facing, especially if you're talking to someone about a law that they're likely to look at or that they're voting on or about to pass. So don't think it just has to be backwards, it can be forwards facing. How will the new change impact your life? So I talk a good bit about why I left the classroom. I left the classroom because I could no longer support or felt like I could no longer support my students, and be authentic in my classroom. If you're talking about something that's impacted you, you could talk about, I know we've had tons of changes around the healthcare for trans kids. You could talk about how that might have impacted you and your family, if that has impacted your family. You could talk about any of the laws that have been pervasive across the state as just being something that's impacting the mental health of your family, your child. All of those are things that you can bring forward. I know Jennifer gave me an example when we were first talking about bringing this forward of someone who, when she went to buy a car, she had always driven a sedan and ended up getting a larger car, got a minivan instead, not because her kids had a lot of activities to go to, but because of the climate that we're in right now. She wanted to be able to flee the state if she needed to. That is a hugely impactful story that really is about things that our legislature is doing that are creating harm. Maybe it's not a specific law or policy, but just the overall overwhelm of this onslaught against LGBTQ people and our families. So when you're putting together your story, find something in your life, in your community, or something that impacted your child and utilize that as part of your powerful narrative. This is really like the meat part of your story. What is it that has changed based on the things that these people have done, that our legislators or your school board have done? Um, so, anatomy of your story, the first thing, get connected to them, tell them who you are and why you're there. But the second part is really having the story, the piece where you connect to how what they're doing has changed your life and your family's life. The third part, I wish weren't so important, but it generally is. Money is a huge driver of change in our communities, change at the state level. Is there an economic impact to what's happening? And if there is, what is the impact? So for example, me leaving the classroom meant that my school district now has another slot to fill. I know in our county, my current school district has 400 teacher openings. I was a highly effective science teacher. We do not grow on trees. It is hard to train and retain teachers right now in the state of Florida. And by them having anti-LGBTQ laws, they made another hole in a classroom where students are not getting what they need, but also the district is having to find people, they're having to train people, and they're having to pay more to retain people because people don't want to work in hostile work environments. That would be an economic impact to the laws that they might not have been looking at when they first passed them. If you can think of an economic impact for something that you are connected to, that can go a long way, especially for some lawmakers who might not be moved by the personal impact, who might not be moved by the harms that they're creating, but might be moved by how it would impact the economy. Being able to say that you run a small business and you've seen a huge dip in tourism because people don't want to come to the space anymore because of the hostility. That would be an economic impact that you can name that they might not have considered when they were originally passing these laws. So anytime that you can bring an economic impact forward, try to. If you can't get this third part, that's okay. It's a sort of like you have meat and potatoes. This is sort of the gravy on the potatoes. You want it, it should be there if you can get it, but if there's not one, that's okay. But the one that you cannot miss is your ask. What specific change are you wanting them to make? If you are telling people what harmed you and how it harmed you, and you're giving them your personal narrative and you're telling them your powerful story, and you get up and walk away, all you've done is complained to them or whined to them, but you haven't actually asked them to do anything. The ask is the super, super important piece at the end. And it's okay for them to sit slightly uncomfortably at the end when you ask for something that they're not ready to give. What specific change are you wanting? How are you going to improve your life or other people's lives if they change this thing? So, for example, if they were to repeal the Don't Say LGBTQ laws, that would massively impact people's lives. So, my ask would be if you are faced with a repeal of the Don't Say LGBTQ laws, can I count on you to vote to repeal this law? And then sit there with them for a moment. It will be really awkward for you. It'll be really awkward for them, but they will likely answer. This is a trick from teaching. It's called wait time. Give it at least a 20-second count before you say anything or do anything else. It gives them a moment to have to think about it because there's nothing else in the room to do right then. They may not answer you. This is where my training in advocacy comes in. For us to change the minds of someone and get them to do something, it generally takes 12 to 15 touches. If I want to get someone to vote and they haven't voted in the past, it takes about 15 times of asking in a way that they understand for them to possibly change their mind. The same thing is happening with these lawmakers. So if they do not come back with, yes, of course I will repeal, don't take that as a failure on your part. Maybe you're just person number 4 that is coming in to ask, and that's okay. Remember at the very beginning, we talked about 3 reasons that you should share your story. One of those is that you're lowering the bar for them to say yes later. So don't take a no or that they don't agree with you at the end as a failure, because it will take a ton of people, more than a dozen things happening for that change to happen. They need powerful stories consistently with the same messaging repeatedly for them to make a change. And that's part of why things like Pride at the Capitol are so incredibly important, because we get a lot of people there at one time sharing similar stories, but asking the same thing. That's why we get people on the same page, work on talking points, and make sure that our asks are very similar. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has any questions. Unfortunately, my second monitor isn't working anymore, so I can't see hands, but Jennifer, if you can help me out with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't see any hands, but there's some good comments. Yeah, that Aaron's saying that this is the most important part. And I think this is a part a lot of us forget, right? You know, we feel like we're in there, we want to give them our story, and they're going to make their own decision. They're going to make up their mind. Oh, wow, that was such a powerful story. I better not vote this way. But when we give them the exact language and we tell them exactly what we expect as their constituents too, I think it reminds them that they are voted. You know, we vote for them in or out of office. And so, you know, if we are the 15th person that comes in there and says that this is something important to us and this is what we want, you know, maybe they realize that this is something that's very important to a lot more people than they think. So I do agree that this is such a big part of our ask, is letting them know we're going to tell you who we are, how it affects us, and what we really are asking you, because you work for us, what we want you to do. Anyone else have any, it doesn't have to be a question. If you have a comment or, I'm writing down my story here. I think this is so helpful because it kind of breaks it down. You really look at who you are and how you're able to, leverage those things. Besides working for Equality Florida, I'm a registered nurse. And so I wouldn't even think of putting that in my story, but that is powerful because when I talk about health equity, when I talk about, some of the health care that is no longer available, for them to know that I'm coming from a medical background. But before we started this, I didn't even think to put that in there because I thought my whole thing would be coming from this as a parent. But I know there's folks on here that are also teachers that are going to be coming up at Pride at the Capitol. And besides being a parent, I think that, and we also have folks that are, we have a pediatrician that is a parent of a trans child and a pediatrician. And I think making sure that we have those stories in there and those points in there are going to be great.
Awesome. Yeah, agreed. That's part of why when I did the mapping, I wanted to make sure people saw that I was including things that were maybe outside of the bubble of just this one space of advocacy. Because you're a whole human. You have a whole self of experience, and all of that could be something that you can utilize in your narrative when you are talking and advocating. So I appreciate the example, especially with the nursing. Um, it's really important that they know that you're coming to this not just with the expertise of a parent, but also as a healthcare provider. So great example. Okay, those are the four core pieces. That's the anatomy, your introduction, why should they connect with you? So how long have you been here? What have you been doing? Your personal story, as far as the real meat of your story, what's happening, what has happened, how has it impacted you? The third part is that economic impact, if you have one. And that last piece is the ask. That is really the core of writing a narrative while taking into account that map that we made where you're looking at yourself as a whole individual, really talking through what do you have to bring to the table as far as advocacy, what experiences can you draw on to make your narrative. Okay, here are some pieces. Now that we've talked about the core anatomy of your story, some things that you can think about when you're approaching your statement. Being direct and assertive. Advocating for your community is not rude. For a lot of people, especially who were raised to be women, we are told consistently that it is our job to make everyone else in the room comfortable. It's our job not to make waves. It's our job not to um, be direct or assertive, but to be polite. You can 100% be assertive and direct and advocate for your community. That is not rude. The thing that people are doing, the legislators are doing that is creating harm, you naming what they're doing isn't rude. So when you're looking through your narrative and you're softening language, maybe think twice before you soften the language because it is okay to be loud and powerful and assertive in these moments. It's what our families need, it's what our communities need, and it is not in any way rude to stand up for yourself, for your family, and your community. Um, Oftentimes, taking an indirect approach can mess things up. You might lose your way when you're talking. You might not be completely understood if you're beating around the bush instead of saying the thing directly. Maybe you won't be fully understood. Or in the case of being a person who's testifying at a school board meeting or testifying in front of a committee, those things are often timed, and you might run out of time to be able to say what you're wanting to say. So I would highly recommend anytime that you're looking at your full statement, don't shy away from being assertive. Don't shy away from being bold in your wording. Now, I'm not advocating to be blunt and rude or curse or anything of that matter. Generally, that can sometimes turn off people that you're trying to talk to. But direct and assertive is always welcome in those spaces, and it's generally expected. So don't feel like you need to soften your language. Consider shared values when you're writing your narrative. Using terms that the people who are listening to you are already predisposed to like can sometimes make them more willing to listen. So, freedom from discrimination, fair treatment under the law, opportunity to succeed. regardless of party, those are generally things that either side is going to want. Those are words that are pretty commonly used in both sides. So being able to use some of those phrases in your narrative writing will predispose them to listen to you more than they would have if you are bringing forward divisive language or you are bringing forward something that makes them feel like they shouldn't connect with you anymore or you're not someone they need to listen to. Um, when you're talking about LGBTQ plus people or any marginalized community, name the harm. I've said that a few times as we've been talking about it today, but one of the things that a lot of people will shy away from is exactly what harmed them. So they might think about if someone had slapped you in the face, instead of saying, "You slapped me and that hurt my face," you might say, "Ow, that hurt," or "Please don't do that again." But you're not naming the thing that happened. If you don't name the harm first, it's really easy for the people that you're talking to ignore that they had a part in the thing that has harmed your family. So if you say, "My family is really struggling and we're having a really hard time," but you don't say why or from what, they're going to be able to easily mentally scapegoat something else. Name the harm and what they did that contributed to it. It's a really important piece when you're looking at your narrative. Other considerations, find your comfort zone. You are not there to be the end all be all expert in the field. You're not there to be the expert on legislation. You're not there to be the expert on policy. You are the expert on your story. You're the expert on how it's impacted you, your family, and your community. Don't feel like you have to be the expert in every other space. Jennifer's example about being a nurse and having that expertise, that's great for her to bring in. Don't feel like you need, so if you're talking about medical care for trans kids, don't feel like you need to know everything there is to know about all of the different types of treatments that are available, or even about the legislation and every word that it says. You don't have to be the expert in that. You just need to make sure that your statement talks about the impact what they did is having. And then you are here to show how their decisions have impacted you. If they want a person who is an expert on legislation or policy, they will seek them out. Or generally, so if we're talking like Pride at the Capitol, Equality Florida has people who are experts in those things. We will have them testifying too. So don't feel like you need to cover that. Cover the part that is your comfort zone and is the thing that you are the expert in. Timing is incredibly important. This isn't as much important if you're having a one-on-one conversation or if you're in a district meeting with your lawmaker, but it is really important if you are going to a committee meeting or if you're going to a school board meeting or to a city council meeting. They're generally going to have a time limit. Most places, it's going to be around 3 minutes. I can tell you in the Capitol, it's 3 minutes unless they decide it's not. That's always incredibly frustrating, but they generally base how long public comments are based on how many people have signed up. I've been in places where 3 minutes, they keep it and it takes up most of the afternoon. But I've also been to committee hearings where they've had more than 100 people sign up and they give everyone 1 minute. During some of the other work that we did last session, we had over 200 people sign up to speak. They cut it to 30 seconds a person. So I always recommend have your full 3 minutes ready, but have a shorter version just in case that time gets cut so that you're not frustrated by it. You know what you want to say and it hits the highlights as much as you can. So have that shorter version ready if you know that there's a time limit. Oh, I'm going to stop and pause there for a second before we go to that last slide. That last slide is optional if we have time. Are there any questions that people have about narrative writing, about any of the extra considerations that we just talked about? Susan?
Yeah, I'm thinking about when there are a group of people going together and that 3 minutes gets cut down to 30 seconds. Would it be prudent for the group to just say, let one person talk or let two people talk Because how much can you really get across in 30 seconds?
So that's a really good point. When I'm talking about they cut to 30 seconds, it's generally in committee testimony. The way that that works is as you come to the committee meeting, they have a paper for each person to fill out,
Mhm.
and you say what you're there to talk about. You put your name, and then the whoever's running that committee meeting calls the person. You can't give extra time. So like it's not like I can say, okay, well, let's make sure that this person gets 4 minutes or this person gets 3 minutes. They're going to cut it to 30. I will say just strategic or strategy wise, sometimes it is prudent for us to have less people but more time to speak. Sometimes it is more prudent for us to overwhelm the space and to have the 200 people show up. So you've now entered the territory of my bread and butter. My organizing space is trying to figure out what's going to be the best scenario for us to kill that bill. Um, and sometimes it's overwhelming the space. Sometimes it's having 3 or 4 really amazing speakers. It really just depends on what's going on. And while I would love to be able to say that I can control that, we can't control how many people actually show up or if the opposition has a whole bunch of people there. So let's say
Mhm.
we decide we want 4 really amazing speakers, but the other side decides that they want to flood the room and have 50 people. We don't want 4 amazing speakers with their 50 not wanting what we want speakers happening at the same time. In that case, we would want to have the larger majority. Generally, part of my job is making sure that any room where we are discussing LGBTQ rights, that we exist in every room and that we outnumber the opposition. And so part of that is making sure that we know what the opposition is doing as much as we can, that we're getting quality people who have something to say, which is part of this training, and then that we outnumber people who are there to try and take the rights of LGBTQ people. But
Mhm.
not a bad question. It's just a strategy question that is
Mhm.
not always, it's more art than science to get the right number of people there that have good things to say.
Thank you.
Any other questions people have?
I want to jump in and I know I don't see questions, but the part of not having to know have all the answers, I think is so big for so many folks. It's intimidating. I don't want to, go and speak because I don't really know all the laws, or what if they ask me a question and I can't answer it? And I just want to reiterate how important it is for you to be able to say, I actually really don't know the answer to that, but I know that, there are others that do, or let me get back to you with that. Um, and as parents, caretakers, as folks, as part of the community, it's not your job to do that, right? When our policy director goes in, it's his job to have all the answers, and he does.
Right.
But even myself, I mean, often I will say, even if it's like a media thing, I will let the reporter know, listen, I'm not if you're here to get all the details on what the bill is, and then I don't know that. But if you want to talk to a parent who has a child that this is affecting, then you're talking to the right person. So, feel confident in that they are not going to look at you any differently because you don't walk in there as a lawyer, as someone that really knows all the policies. It's really not our job. That's not what we're here. Um,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Alicia, there's a question in there. I don't know if you can see it, Anita. A 3 minute, 1 minute, and 30-second one. If you could give us an example of those.
So sure. So generally, if you are taking your narrative, you want your narrative to be 3 minutes max. Even if you're having a one-on-one, you don't want something super long because you're only going to get so much time with them. So that's your full story, all 4 parts of the anatomy of your story with all of the considerations we talked about. The 1 minute, I would definitely cut economic impact unless it's just a really, really winning piece. I would cut down on some of the space where you were decide or discussing how you connect to people, especially because you're now probably talking to a full dais of people. So you're not going to be saying, "Hey, you're in the same sorority as my wife," or those connections are less. Not that they're not important, but they're less personal when you're talking to a full dais of people. But you can say, instead of 30 seconds of let me connect with you, cut it down to 10 seconds. I live in Florida. I've lived in Polk County for 13 years. I was a teacher for 10 years, and then go into your story. So I would definitely cut the first part of your anatomy of your story, cut the economic part almost entirely out. Never leave off the ask, especially if you're in a committee meeting. You want to end with please vote no or please vote yes on whatever it is that's what's happening there. And then just make sure that that meat part of your story, where you're explaining how what they're doing is going to impact you, takes up probably 30 to 40 seconds of your 1 minute speech. If they cut you to 30 seconds, which is incredibly rare, but if they do, I would keep it to I'm a Florida resident, or I'm a Polk County resident, or I'm a whatever short connection you can. Don't leave off the connection. That is the piece that helps them know they probably should listen. Then cut your meat of your story to I'm a parent of an LGBTQ kid. This is going to make them lose their health care. We do not need this. You are attacking a community that does not need to be attacked. Please vote no on whatever that is. That would be how I would cut it from 3 to 1 to 30 seconds. The 30 seconds thing I've only ever seen twice in the years that I've been doing advocacy work in the Capitol. And they were both times that I helped fill the room to max capacity, and then some. And so that doesn't happen very often. But when it does happen, generally it's because it is an outrageous law. And so you being one more voice in that space is important. We do need people to show up and be that voice in that space. But individual stories are less effective because there is just a mass of them. And so making sure that you still are powerful, but not you're not trying to have as much of as an empathic connection as much as you are trying to stand with the large wave of people that are saying don't do this. Does that help? Does that cover the question? Okay. Any other questions? There is one more piece. I do want to do a very, very, very brief thing about the media for anyone who is coming to Pride at the Capitol.
So Anita, can I ask a question? Hi. And this is something that Jen and I have talked a lot about, but whenever I'm talking to parents, and I talked to a couple of parents trying to get them to join me next week, and the concern is, well, I don't want to out my kid. I don't want to, I don't want to show up on a list. I don't want to, and I don't really have a good answer to that. And I share some of those concerns myself. And how do you kind of manage that? Obviously, you don't have to say what you're not comfortable sharing. Like, I get that. And that's how I tailor my message depending on my audience. But, can we talk a little bit about that? Because it's sometimes not safe to say some of the things that we want to say.
Yes. So 100%, you are definitely not the first person I've had this conversation with. The first thing is only share the things that you're willing to share. But know that when you sign in to speak at a committee hearing, the paper that you're filling out is yours to fill out. I have a lot of people that I've talked to, they're like, I don't want to put my address or even like what city I'm in. There's nothing that they're checking. 123 Maple Street, Miami, Florida is perfectly fine. There's no one that's going to be checking it. You don't have to show ID. You will be recorded and it goes to the Florida channel. So I don't want to tell people like it's entirely anonymous. It is not. But if you want to put just your first name and your last initial, there's nothing that stops you from doing that. I highly recommend that for anyone who has those concerns if they're going to speak. If for any reason people are still hesitant to speak at those meetings, just having people in those meetings to fill the space and to be standing up with other people who are speaking can be really powerful. And oftentimes what I find is once people get there, they're more likely to speak because they'll see what's going on. They'll see they're one of 200 or they're one of 100 people that are speaking. The likelihood that you're going to have negative impacts coming back on you are fairly low. There's only a few nerdy people like me who watch the Florida channel, so the likelihood that anyone back home is going to be seeing it is very low. But I won't ever tell people that it's 100% without risk, because there's nothing that stops some person online from picking up the video and deciding that they want to make it viral. It doesn't happen very often. It's very, very not likely. And each person has to assess that risk for themselves. But I will say, as you fill out the papers, as far as being on like a government list, your first name, your last initial, and just the city name or the largest city in your area. I often say I live in Orlando. I don't live in Orlando. I live an hour outside of Orlando, but Orlando is the closest large city to my space. Those are some of the safety things that you can do to make sure that some of those are appeased. But even if all they do is come and stand in solidarity and help support other families, that can still be an important part. So that's how I would approach that.
Thank you, Anita. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Ray puts a good point in there as well. Attending something like Pride at the Capitol doesn't mean you have to speak. Being there and filling the room, being a part of the movement, being there is very empowering. And so they're on a form for, especially in a committee, you can just say that you waive in opposition, and they read it and it goes into record, which is the powerful part. So if this is something that, it is for whatever reasons like what Erin is saying, or you're just like, this isn't my thing. I want to be a part of this, but I don't want to feel pressured that I have to go up and share any part of my story. Being there and even filling out a form and waiving an opposition does help us. And so I just want to put that in there. And Ray, that's a great point.
Yeah, the other piece for Pride at the Capitol specifically, a really important part of Pride at the Capitol that we do is lawmaker conversations outside of committee. So we set up meetings with lawmakers with small groups to talk to. In those meetings, there is no sign-in. There is nothing that requires you to say anything in paper about who you are. Those are not recorded. Those are generally happening either in the lawmaker's offices, or sometimes the lawmaker can't be there, but their aide is there. If you do have someone who's just extremely uncomfortable with sharing their story in any way that would be public, tell them that the lawmaker meetings exist, because they can still have one-on-one meetings with lawmakers in a way that's not in a public space. And so those can still be really powerful moments without needing to be outing anyone in public. Awesome. Okay, very last thing, because I know we are running out of time. Talking to media, I would highly recommend, for the most part, people don't talk to media. Almost always, it's not a great plan. But if you're going to, here are a few really, really, really quick tips. You do not have to talk to anyone. If you are in the middle of an interview and they start to make you uncomfortable, you have every right to walk away from that interview, even in the middle of it. If someone has approached you to speak to you and they say they're from the press, ask for two things. Ask for their press credentials. They should have a press badge. If they don't have that, they should have a business card that has their news outlet on it. I have never met a reporter in my entire life who doesn't have a stack of business cards with them. They don't have one of those two things, they are not a legitimate press outlet. The other piece is, if they do hand you that and it's from a news source that you wouldn't trust to get news from, don't talk to them. If it is a blogger somewhere who is trying to find content for their clickbait, don't give them content. It does not help the movement at all. It does not help advocating for your family at all. And generally, it will be cut in ways that will make you look like you don't know what you're talking about. So those are my really, really big pieces. If you do choose to do an interview with someone, which again, not my recommendation, but if you do, you have the ability to repeat your key points regardless of the question they're asking. Generally, the person who's interviewing you is looking for a 5 to 10-second clip of you saying something. If you repeat your point every time they ask a question, all they're going to get is newsreel of you saying the thing you want to be heard. Because the interview that you're doing is actually, your audience is not the interviewer. Your audience is the people that are watching or the people that would be hearing it at home. So just repeat the thing you want to be heard. If what you want people at home to hear is they are taking away health care from my child, then every question they ask you, regardless of what they ask you about, should have that in it. And then lastly, Jennifer said this earlier, but it's always better to say you don't know rather than to make up an answer. So they ask you something that you're not sure of, say, I don't know. I'm not the expert in that. But what I do know is that this thing is impacting my family in this way. Just pivot back to your repeating point. And that's my like super fast 1 minute talking to the media space, just because anytime you go to a school board meeting, to a county commission meeting, to the Capitol, press will be there trying to find everyday people to humanize the story, and you might be approached. And so anytime that I can talk to people, I like giving at least a little bit of media basics. Just remember that the training that we're doing can work in any of these spaces. You have a powerful story. You just have to put it together. And your story can be the thing that can help change someone's mind. So I greatly appreciate you all being here. I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer. I know we are basically at time, but I'm also here to stay if people have questions.
Thank you, Anita. That was really helpful. I took a lot of notes, and I see a lot of folks writing down so that I could put my story together for our Pride at the Capitol. If you have any further questions, we can stay on, for another minute, but I want to be courteous for our time. We're at 7 o'clock. Anita, I really appreciate it. I will be there for week 1. Anita, I'm sure you're going to be up there for, I know week 2 at least, but probably week 1 as well. And we will have Equality Florida folks there throughout the Capitol, throughout the session as well. And so I look forward to seeing those of you who are going to be joining us. If you're joining us for the first time, or if this is again something that, you are an expert advocate, I think that every time we go, every time that we show our faces in these spaces, it's so powerful. So thank you all for taking the time tonight. Alicia, I love you also did put in there for the media, never believe off the record. That's a good one. That is a good one. And again, Parenting with Pride, you all have the website, the button on there that get help, that goes directly to me. So feel free if you ever are in a situation where you're approached with media and you want some talking points, or you want us to vet someone, please feel free to reach out. That does go directly to me. And thank you, Anita. I didn't put the link in there. There is our Pride at the Capitol. It is not too late. It's going to be great. In a time, and I always say this, times are really hard, and it's really frustrating. And a lot of times we feel we don't have control over a lot of what we're seeing, whether it's in our parenting journey, our individual, in our state, in our country, in our world. Coming together with like-minded folks to advocate and just show our presence, really, really, you walk away with such a feeling of pride, such a feeling of hope. And so I hope all of you will think about joining us. And if not this year, then next year. And thank you so much. If you have any questions, again, we'll stay on for another minute or so. I actually have another meeting, believe it or not. And thank you all for being here. I will be sending out the recording. And so you can look for that in your email in a couple of days. Take care, everyone. Thank you.